Keystone Cops.
What's going on, guys? Back again with another video. Clearly I've got the Hinderer Firetac here in front of me, and it seems like there is a little bit of buzz popping up around this knife now. And I didn't, usually I would do a little bit of research and kind of get my numbers all together and all that stuff, but I'm just going to kind of talk to you guys a little bit today. I've owned this knife for probably, I don't know, 3 years now. I did have it sent out for Rockwell testing, which I think you can see the divot right there. Lots of stuff. I've sharpened the knife. This is a 600 grit wicked edge finish. I believe it's at 17 degrees per side, I think. Again, I didn't look at all my notes and everything, guys. You'll have to excuse me. And this is finished with a 1 micron diamond strop, Ken Schwartz CBN spray on just a leather strop, if you were wondering. Now, this is a knife that I don't think a lot of people know a lot about. Originally, this was a custom model that Rick did for years. This was kind of like Emerson has his pre-tac knives before he got into all the tactical type of knives, before Rick got into the kind of first responder type knives. This was a knife that he made. It remained a custom, well, it remains a custom model even still, but it remained just a custom model, only a custom model for many years. And then maybe about 4 or 5 years back, again, guys, I didn't look at my notes, so about 4 or 5 years back, this came to market as a production model. There wasn't a lot of fanfare. There wasn't a huge release of information. You know, sometimes Rick will even get on and he'll kind of talk about a new model that's coming out. No, I don't, to the best of my knowledge, I don't recall any of those things happening. However, the knife came to market. It did not seem to receive a lot of fanfare. I saw the knife. It looked like something that appealed to me because it was a little bit slimmer. It was a little bit sleeker. It looked like it would be good in hand. It looked like it would be a good general use knife. So I kind of waited, and I really, if you guys know, I don't like to buy Hinderers off the primary market, you know, firsthand from a retailer, because honestly, the XM18 platform just has never really appealed to me all that much. So I never really saw I never really had the desire to spend the money. And then when I looked at secondary prices and saw that I could save $100 sometimes, sometimes even more, on a knife rather than buying it from a retailer, that was always something that I looked into more than buying from a retailer. However, I just wanted this knife so much that I ended up picking the knife up. And I have to say, guys, I've said for years, and it looks like some guys now are kind of finding out the same thing. This knife here, in my opinion, is a better general use knife than the XM18. And I don't know why this knife does not receive more love in the community. It is a much more neutral looking knife. Yes, it is. It is a little bit long. I don't have a ruler next to me. I'll just use these calipers. But if we look at the blade length here, and yes, I know this is not the ideal way to use these calipers. We're talking about roughly 3.5 inches, you know, 3.4 inches worth of blade. So yes, it is a little bit long. However, this knife does not feel heavy. It does not feel big. It does not feel bulky. It's very well chamfered in all the right places, so there are no hot spots. It has a .137 blade stock, where it is 21 thousandths behind the edge up here and around 19 thousandths behind the edge back here. So it is a little bit thinner behind the edge than your standard XM18 model. So it's gonna be able to slice a little bit easier through thicker materials. It just really has more of a general appeal to it, in my opinion. It becomes very smooth on these Teflon washers. It is very well centered. There just aren't a lot of issues with this knife. Whereas I think, especially with the newer model, the XM series, that tri-way pivot system gives a lot of people a lot of issues. Fortunately or unfortunately, this has not been switched over to the tri-way pivot system, which I know I heard Rick saying that he was going to switch it over maybe 2 or 3 years ago. But it just, like I said, it just seems like things don't happen to this model. We don't get any aftermarket parts. We don't get a lot of different scale options. We don't get a lot of different blade grind or blade finish options. It just seems to be a knife that's brought to market. They release them on the site, and if you know about them, you know about them. If you don't know about them, you don't know about them. But the knife, it has a lot of straight cutting edge, which is good for things like, a lot of people like those Warren Cliff blades, because that straight edge allows you to just kind of bite into those boxes and things of that nature. It has a little bit of belly up here towards the top, the tip. So that way, if you needed to get in and do something, you don't have to really raise your wrist up quite so high. You've got a nice little bit of belly you can use here. It has a very refined tip. So if you do need to pierce something, you can pierce it pretty easily. Because of that 3.4 inches of blade, you've got a good amount of reach. It's not a very broad blade. So again, it's easy to maneuver through materials if you needed to cut through something a little bit thicker. It's lighter than an XM18. It just, there are a lot of different reasons that I think this knife should be in consideration for someone who is looking at a Hinderer knife. And again, I'm not knocking the XM platform. Clearly, it's a very popular platform. Clearly, it served a lot of first responders well for many years and still does. It's just interesting to me that with the history and the legacy and the general appeal of a knife of this style, that this knife is not pushed more to the forefront by Hinderer or by the community. Because what's the first thing that we hear from guys when we start talking about Hinderers or Striders or Emersons or things like that? Oh, you're tactical, a mall ninja, etc., etc., etc. This knife, even though it's a Hinderer knife, the very first thing that a lot of guys, when they get this knife in hand, say is this is more like a CRK inspired Hinderer than it is a Hinderer. You could, if I put this knife in your hand and it did not have any type of labeling on it, you would not know. Your first response would not be, oh yeah, that's a Hinderer knife, isn't it? You wouldn't think that. It's just, there's just something about it that is so almost uncharacteristic of a Hinderer knife, because we know Hinderer knives for being those big, overbuilt, tough, tear down anything type of knives. And this knife, even though it could do anything that you need to do within reason, it does not have that same feeling in hand. A few of the knocks that people always ask about or comment on, these pivot screws are not flush. But honestly, guys, I don't know. It's never been an issue for me. Like I said, I've owned this knife for 3-ish years, 3-4 years. It's never been an issue for me. This pivot never loosens up. I never have any issues with this pivot. As a matter of fact, I usually have to tighten it down even more, because this Teflon is just, that's very tight on the pivot, and it still just drops on your finger. And if it was just tight enough where there was no play in this knife, it would drop so fast that I don't feel comfortable carrying it like that. Let's see what else. When it first came out, some people were talking about this ramp right here. I don't do a lot of cuts with my thumb on the top, but it's not enough of a ramp that it causes any issues. I mean, maybe my finger's just fat, but all the fat in my finger can form right around that, and I can press down on this thumb disc and behind here without any issue, even with that point in my thumb, and it's not a hot spot. Let's see what else. Let's see what else was talked about. I know a lot of guys have asked for, or I've seen a few guys ask for this knurling pattern to be brought over to, I think you can see it there, to be brought over to some other knives, because it is very effective. It does provide for a lot of grip without being overly aggressive. You have the barrel spacer construction, so if you are going to get this knife very dirty, you can just hose it out or whatever you need to do. Again, it is Teflon, so again, if you just want to hose it out or whatever you need to do, there is no lube or anything on this knife. I think maybe when I first got it, I did have some lube on here, but I have not had any lube on this knife in years, and it's worked fine. And this is full of pocket lint. It hasn't been taken apart in at least a year, and it's very smooth. The detent was another thing. People always, for some reason, ask about the detent. If you shake it very hard, you can get it to pop out, but again, it's nothing that I would be overly concerned about. It's a very positive detent, and it's almost so strong to the point where if you happen to put your finger on the back of this lock bar, you almost can't even open the knife. So I don't have any issues with the detent or anything like that. It's been a very just well-rounded knife. Anytime I want a knife that I can use for any task and not have to worry about it, whether it be something more delicate where I want to do more precision cutting, or it's something where I think I'm going to need to do some prying or cutting through some heavier materials, this knife has served me well. The texturing, everything. It's just been a good all-around knife, in my opinion, and I think now it's starting to receive some of that, some of those accolades in the community, and I think it's well worth it, guys. Love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you have owned one, if you've been thinking about owning one, comment down below. I appreciate you guys watching, and as always, remember, a lazy man carries a dull knife, and don't be a dumb person with a smartphone.